So I've been asked to give a brief retrospective on the history of the usage of Komi as a first-person advantage mitigating factor in the game of tech. So the TLDR, even in the very beginning, a committee was formed, kind of an offshoot of the USTA, in order to explore the possibilities of finding some rules variations which would be used in order to mitigate the first person advantage. This was useful for two reasons. One, because even back then we understood that white had a very significant advantage, and the game was kind of less fun when you were forced to either A, you win as white, as in kind of a steamroll fashion, and it's not really satisfying, or B, you're playing black and you kind of get steamrolled, and that's not fun either. It kind of wasn't conducive to a fun playing environment. So, secondly, there was a concern from a tournament point of view because for the early tournaments we had to always play 2 games because we knew that if you only played 1 game matches, then whoever got white was at a pretty significant advantage even in those days. So, although the committee was kind of inconclusive in its findings, it kind of fizzled out. I'll discuss more later. It did come up with a bunch of different possible solutions. Later, Arch Medicine starts hosting some unofficial tournaments, some blitz tournaments where Komi is used in order to try to combat White's advantage, which we knew was even higher in blitz, at least it was at that time, because White felt like they had kind of an overwhelming advantage. Not only did they have an objective advantage, but they could also make lots of easy moves, and Black was kind of scrambling to defend. Later, when Archie starts hosting official USTA sanctioned tournaments, uh, his preference for Komi starts to take shape there. And then finally, this kind of culminates in the COVID-19 Cup, which took place in right at the height of the first wave of the pandemic in March, April 2020, where Archie put full Komi support into this tournament. Even though Playtech couldn't support it, we were just manually adjudicating the games when necessary. And at the end of this, the general player base reaction was starting to sort of range from neutral to positive. So that's the TLDR. So in the beginning, we had the FPA committee. This was formed as a Google group, which you may not know that that feature even existed, but it did. And that was the original means of communication for both the USTA and the FPA committee. So this was formed in August 2016, which was kind of just after the Kickstarter ended, right around May, I believe, of 2016. So within this committee, there were, I was actually on it, and there were a number of other players that took some amount of responsibility in coming up with different methods, kind of organizing our thoughts, getting player surveys of players who had actually tried different methods and so forth. And the activity in the Google group continues until about early 2017, before ultimately fizzling for 2 major reasons. One is that some of the major players kind of left the scene as the initial popularity from the release of the game wears off. So this is natural, of course. Right at the very height of the game's popularity in mid to late 2016, there was a huge boom of activity, and lots of people were trying to get involved with the game. And understandably, the momentum would not carry on forever, and some people decided to move on. Unfortunately for us, some of those people were involved in the FPA committee, so actually the committee kind of stalled out a little bit. But fundamentally, there was also an issue with testing the implementation. So we'll go into the methods shortly, but the problem is there is no kind of server support for officially playing these games. So back in that day, there was no Discord method of playing. There's no tech bot for playing the game over Discord, and Playtech was really the only reasonable implementation that we had, by some definition of reasonable. um, and although some of these methods could kind of be played on Playtech, they were actually kind of tricky to set up, and some of them were very, very difficult to set up. But among the successes of the FPA committee was at least, they did outline a lot of possible solutions. It wasn't just that the FPA was sort of sitting in their ivory tower thinking about these problems, but rather they were kind of sourcing the community on what they had to say and kind of categorizing the different proposals. One actual major success that did come out of the system was that we tested the black in the center variation. So back in those days, fives was the major concern and six was played occasionally, but not kind of the main game. So a very natural question is, can you balance the game by putting black's first piece in the center on fives? So if I go to this, and I have to make a 5x5 game. So this kind of position was explored a lot because we imagine if there's any too flat solution to the problem, this is going to be the most extreme case. We've given black the best possible first square. I think even in this time there was very little argument about this. And white has basically the worst possible square, but they're up a tempo. So this is a very natural way. And you can do this as long as the other player is coordinating with you. And one good thing that we did have is that we had, I think he came out a little bit later actually, but we had Nelhaj on the committee, and Nelhaj was the creator of Tactician, which at that time was the preeminent force in the TechBot community. So he created a fork of the Tactician bot that would, it was actually a fork of Friendly Bot, I think, but that's neither here nor there. That would place black's first stone in the center and then play the fives game out. So this actually gave us a lot of some real testing data. Although the games were primarily played with a bot, the general consensus was that this actually is not that bad of a method, but it kind of ruins the idea of opening theory because placing black's first stone in the center kind of takes away a lot of the variety of the game. At least that was the feeling at the time. And no one really liked it enough to really seriously consider it as proposing a change to the rules. And obviously, you wouldn't have to do something quite as clunky as this. You could basically say black places the first two stones in the game. And you could assume that black may want to place white in the corner as usual and then place themselves in the center. So there is kind of an elegant way to do this, but it wasn't really the most beloved fix. This is a document from the waning days of the FPA committee where we discuss kind of the proposed solutions. Some of these I actually have no memory of, and they may have just been mentioned in passing. But of course, the very first two are about restrictions on black's the placement of black stone. So no edge is kind of a less extreme version, and then we have black in the center. Komi, of course, as we know. Although in this case, Komi is being proposed as a pi rule. You can see it actually. that one player chooses the Komi and then the next player chooses the color. Um, this is a kind of clunkier way of doing it, but it does mean that you don't have to standardize the Komi, um, which could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. We have some other kind of pie rules, um, where one player is placing a bunch of flats and then the other player is choosing the side, so more pie rolls. Another pie roll, and then a major mod and double black stack. So these are two fundamentally different than Komi and the pie roll. Instead, we modify the very initial placement. A major mod or Danish sandwich is it later became standardized as because nobody could remember how to say, spell, or write the word, is this position where white's first stone comes into the game with a black weakness underneath it. Afterwards, the game plays normally. Double black is similar, except instead of the extra piece being under white's stone, it's actually under black's own stone. So both of these have their merits in that they fix the parity, or sorry, not the parity, but the reserve problem, right? If we take that piece from black's reserves, then actually white is not technically leading on reserves anymore, although it's just an advantage of 1, which we know is quite small, but it is technically no longer a lead. And secondly, the thinking is that black can maybe in some way exploit this weakness in order to come back, well, A, to undermine white's initial road if they choose to try to make a road with the a6 piece, but also just to maybe profit in a flat endgame. So if we look at this position, you could ignore the Komi, I just didn't bother to fix it in PTN Ninja. But if we imagine some position where white places 2 flats along this corner, now black does have to invest a wall, but in this scenario, black can be now kind of up, and white is placing in order to kind of hold the draw. Now this maneuver costs a lot of tempi, and this is the worst case as well, where white has placed 2 pieces on the edge. If black instead is only able to exploit 1 piece, white is still placing kind of with advantage, and black is placing to equal up the flat count. So this is probably not enough. But it is interesting. Of course, it's clearly better for black than the initial position, but the question of how much is unclear. There's a similar situation with the double black stack, which I think in the modern tech game is actually a little more attractive, because if you can cash out this stack with 2 pieces, you're truly up. White is actually not even tying when they place their extra piece, because black didn't have to place a wall in order to cash out. And even in this case, if you get the simple capture, white is still placing in order to tie up the flat count. So maybe double black stack had more potential, but we didn't really explore this one quite as much. And as you can see from my PTN, it is possible to construct this on a playtech board and play this out. But what you didn't see is before the video, it took me like several attempts in order to get the dance of the white and black stones to work, in part because the player isn't allowed legally to pass in playtech or in BTN Ninja implementation, which means that actually setting up this position is a bit tricky. Same with the original Amajur mod. Later, Archie would go on to investigate this position in the no swap context, which I suppose is in some ways interesting because it means that white gets to choose if they want their weakness to be in the corner where it's hard to exploit, or like in the center where it's actually playing a role. Although I think in the modern tech instance, having this 2 stack next to your capstone is considered to be largely secure enough. And so I don't know that it works extremely well. No swap became popular, I think, in the Manatee, I believe, was a big advocate for it in the maybe early 2020s. It sounds weird referring to the decade that we're in that way, but the early 2020s. But I came up with some famous quip that you see repeated all the time now, that kind of the central tension of tech is about whether you try to continue your weak road off of the initial piece you've been given, or play for a stronger position in the center, even though you kind of don't make use of your initial stone. So I kind of always thought that no swap was bad, and other players seem to have come around to this as well. But there is, of course, a natural question of if we're doing this other thing to fix FPA, then why are we doing no swap? Or sorry, why are we doing the swap rule, which makes the game way more complicated, way more in quotes, but you know what I mean, and kind of inelegant, when ostensibly the reason that this was created, the swap rule, was in order to balance the game, but in reality it really does nothing of the sort. But it kind of turns out as a side effect to have um, pretty good properties. Now, the other thing to note is that the main form of FPA that was being advocated for at this time is kind of a true pi rule, which is, um, you know, one player selects the position and the other player selects the color. So it's the question, how do you fairly divide a pie? You let one person divide it and you let the other person pick their favorite piece. So the incentive for player one is to make the two pieces as equally balanced as possible, so that when they get the worst piece, they're still relatively happy. So I've always found these pie rules to be a little bit inelegant, because the question of how do you balance the game actually is that you force the players to balance the game on the fly. But the bigger problem is that from a playtech point of view, we really have no support for this at all. Um, you would have to coordinate with the other player ahead of time what they wanted the initial moves to be, and then you'd have to take turns implementing, or take turns, yeah, kind of playing out the moves. And um, the other thing is, as the pie rules get increasingly complicated, um, they get more and more difficult to reason about. And in fact, if one player is placing the pie, they could study the position beforehand and kind of know the theory for both lines, whereas the other side is kind of scrambling. It's kind of not ideal. But the early player base was really in love with this kind of idea, and I'll go into now some of the comments. So this is kind of just me running through the Discord over the years. And yeah, here's my comments in November of 2017, where you can see I was a little bit too animated, but I said, frankly, um, there's kind of two arguments about Komi. Defending Komi, or defining Komi is not good, because as the strength of the player base moves, Komi may shift too. This was a concern. It was kind of a minor one, but for instance, the idea was, if we encode Komi equals 2 into the rules, then maybe we get better, and 2 years later we realize, oh, it should have been Komi 3, and then we're constantly playing this balancing game. Actually, this is not without precedent. In kind of the broader world, the Go community went through a similar change, although they kind of changed around. I think it was from like 6.5 to 7.5 or something, it was in the grand scheme of things, quite a small change. But this was already in kind of the late days of it was 20th century Go. But my second point, again, it's not in the spirit of tech. It was kind of vague and strawmanny. But Salt and Pepper says here, yeah, it's not so much that Komi is not in the spirit of tech as it will change how people play, pushing for people to play for flat wins over roads. And this is what I meant. Um, um, you know, this is the central problem. But even in November 2017, Salt and Pepper, who was one of the best players of that era, kind of agrees. But not much was necessarily done about it. But a lot of players felt that Komi was artificially pushing people to play walls, and walls are kind of against the spirit of tech because they prevent roads and so on and so forth. And I do see the argument. I just never kind of thought it was worthwhile because, in part, the main advantage of Komi over all of these other solutions, from a playtech point of view, is that these all change the way that the game is played. And by that I mean the initial setup of the game, whereas Komi only changes the adjudication of the game. So you and I can play out a whole game, and if you and I know that there's Komi, we can play according to that. But from a game rules point of view, the fact that Komi exists does not matter until after the game is over, when we count the flats and see who wins. So this means that, for instance, you and I can play a playtech game, and we can agree beforehand that the Komi should be 2. We play out the game as such, and then we ignore whatever playtext says the result is, and instead, if necessary, we count the flats out in order to determine the winner. And this sort of thing started to happen a little bit later in the history of TAC. So, as Archie says pretty aptly here, I think the appeal of a positional pi system versus a Komi pi system is that it, at least theoretically, balances gameplay and not just results, right? So this is, again, the central argument against Komi is that it changes the way that tech is played on the board because of the way the game is adjudicated, which some people thought was kind of, this is when I said it was contrary to the spirit of tech, and I argue against it. And I include this brief quip about from Joanna about almost 2 years later we're still discussing FPA, and of course Simon notes that the FPA discussion will be eternal. As it turns out, it wasn't eternal; it just took a few more years, so no big deal. Here in early 2018, I don't remember the full context of this conversation, but Archie says that I agree that Komi is likely the best solution, but would like to try out some positional pi variations before we settle on it. And I point out once again that the pi rule is annoying to implement, and yeah, oh, that was a good screenshot. I included the Discord message. If it's going to be a good game in the long run, it will probably need to evolve a bit, which won't really happen if you can't try stuff. Archie says, which is fair. Finally, some movement happens when Archie in May, June of 2018 hosts the Komi Tech Open. Actually, I kind of forgot that this event happened, but this was kind of in the starting to become the dark years of tech. Maybe the first 2016, 2017, 2018, the player base was already sort of weakening. I perhaps attribute this in some respect to the Komi problem. Ultimately, if your game isn't balanced and you can't sit down and play a single game and expect it to be roughly evenly matched in terms of fairness, I think it means that your game is simply less fun to play, right? Um, and it's definitely very easy for me to say this, um, because I surely cannot speak for everyone else in the community, and these natural like rises and falls in the community definitely happen. But I do think in some ways the lack of first person advantage solutions did play a part in the decline of the game during this time. As 2018 rolls on, there are some more there's some more conflict between kind of the establishment at the time and Arch Venison's way of kind of uh, opting for Komi tournaments. You can see his opinion shift over time. Now we're in October of 2018, and they're talking about tie breaks for tournaments. And there's this old tiebreaker rule that they have, which is called Ford, which we don't really need to look into this. The idea was because we knew that the game was relatively unbalanced, and because for tournaments you can't just simply play games forever until one player wins a match of two, you have to come up with these semi-arbitrary methods for determining tiebreaks. So, yeah, Queso at the time was running some of the tournaments, and yeah, still, his point B, playing a single game with Komi, because Komi has a sizable impact on the way Black plays, is considered too strong of a negative at this time in order for it to be seriously considered. Um, Archie responds back that if there's any way that Black plays differently with Komi, White should be playing that way without Komi. My experience is that when people say things like Komi has a sizable impact on the way Black plays, it's because they haven't played using Komi very much. But at the end, Archie says, but even if we accept that Komi changes the game for the worse, it's better than anything else, essentially. So, again, this is October 2018. The game is weakening. So just after this comment chain continues, this is the continuation of it. And Ben Woe, who is still in charge of the USTA at the time. Also, you're probably right that we should give running games with Komi a real test. I've been admittedly resistant to that in the past, but that isn't fair. I think there are things we could probably learn, and we're looking into it, looking forward, and so on and so forth. And then I make I included my own dumb joke here. But the important thing is here, Arch Venison says, and to think like a year ago I was vocally anti-Komi. So, sort of kind of realizing the same thing that I realized going back through. So this is about 8 months later, June of 2019. We have Queso again, who was the person who was just advocating against Komi in some sense. Says a win is a win is a win. I've been screaming it in the streets for years. Flat wins are still wins. Again, this is kind of in support of Komi to some extent, right? Because Komi says we're going to make it so that in theory Black is going to play more walls, which in theory is going to make less road wins, and so forth. Um, but here at this time, again, Queso is saying it's a reality for tournament settings. First player advantage is prevalent enough that it's unfair to match players in uneven number of matches. And Archie is sort of exhaustedly saying, Komi, um, you know, even even if you're not fully on board with Komi, you can, if you have to play a single tiebreaker game, just play it with two Komi. It's like good enough, right? Now, at this time, also to mid to late 2019, Playtech management starts shifting to being managed by the U.S. Tech Association, and this is a very positive move because at the time, Playtech development had basically been stalled for 2 or 3 years. Um, because the original developer was still graciously hosting the website, but had kind of lost interest in the project, which is understandable. Um, and when this kind of is Playtech becoming managed by the USTA, there's kind of two glaring issues that we want fixed. One is that the rating system, the in-game rating system, was actually just somebody's rating script that they would scrape the Playtech database every so often and update the ratings in a like sticky to ready Reddit post. Um, so you would like go to this random Reddit post in order to check what your rating was every few weeks or whatever if you wanted to, because there was no rating support on the server. And then secondly, we talk about Komi. And Archie says, of course, it's by far the most important. Simon, known Comey Luddite, if you will, um, says, "Do people accept Comey? I didn't realize we had public opinion on Comey." And then we kind of, Archie and I both go up and defend it, right? And of course, if it's in the server, you can still always play zero Comey games, right? So in 2019 to 2020, we have some Blitz tech that uh, Archie starts hosting, and here we have a Komi of 3. We knew this was perhaps a little bit more aggressive, but especially because it was Blitz, we wanted to try to give Black all the help they could get, right? Now, finally, the game noticeably weakened in sort of the 2018-2019 years, but much like how chess had its little chess boom when the quarantine started, we similarly had a bit of a boom. It was less a boom of new players are coming in to play tech, but simply a boom of, hey, because everyone is kind of stuck at home and has relatively more free time, we're going to try to drum up the support from the old players that have been kind of around the community but not actively playing. So this initiative really helped. We were able to get a lot of the best players of the early era, your Salt and Peppers, No Head Coder, um, in order to get them involved. Sime as well. And read the COVID-19 Cup. Archie posts the information and kind of says it like this is the tournament and it's going to be 3 Komi, right? Here again, opinions of other players. Manatee, another big player of this time. I'm fine with whatever Komi. Heck, I'm fine with most anything short of black wins if you get to flats. And of course, Simmons says that's kind of what Komi 3 feels like, to be honest, which of course uh, sounds kind of ridiculous now, but we know there is a big difference, obviously, between Komi 2 and Komi 3, but still. Um, and yeah, Man is sort of pondering the existence and so forth, right? Finally, we kind of come towards the end of that, where the finalists, I think, are Sime and FW, and myself and No Hat, and I beat No Hat. I get to FW in the finals, and I do manage to beat FW for what I consider to be my best tournament win, even though kind of everyone was rusty. Uh, but that's not the point here. The point is that at the end of the final game, Simmons says it was fun to watch and whatever. Fun game to watch, lots of back and forth action. And at the very the very first thing I say is that kind of push for Komi, and FW says he enjoys the format, but we talk about some tactics of the game. I guess I must have made some hard cap or something, and Meta talks about if black is walling more, then maybe white has to hard cap more, and something like this. But that's kind of the way that it goes. From a tournament point of view, what basically happened is that as Arch Venison got A, more favorable towards Kobe, and B, just started getting more responsibilities in the tournament directing position, as we know now, uh, he just sort of slowly started introducing Komi into our tournaments, and of course, the rest is kind of history. Now, regarding bots and Playtech, the official Playtech support would be launched around March of 2021, so about almost exactly a year after um, the COVID-19 Cup, which I remember being quite surprised it was just like all of a sudden implemented. At this time, No Hat was doing a lot of the work on the Playtech server, and he got the ratings working in the server and the Komi support, which were the two big wants of the community at the time, and rightfully so, of course. Regarding bots, we did have some kind of lag in the support of engines, despite the fact that tech engines have been kind of a pivotal part of tech's history. There has always been a bit of resistance for Komi, in part just because of the way that the game has gone. Prior to about 2019, 2020, in kind of the first wave of tech's popularity, Tactician Bot by Nelhaj was the first major competitive bot, and at that time, Tactician Bot was maybe a little bit better than the best humans, but maybe not much. But in tech, we've always kind of been playing in a computer's world, but we humans are doing our best. And of course, now we look back at Tactician Bot and we beat it kind of mercilessly, and we wonder how it was ever a challenge. Although, playing black with no Komi can be rough anyway. But regardless, by the time that Komi was starting to get widespread public support, circa 2020, 2021, the developers of the original tech AI engines were no longer really active in the community. So backporting them was not really uh, an option unless somebody was actually going to spend some real development time on it. And to be clear, just adding Komi to the implementation of the game is super easy, but the problem is you want the bot to kind of, to some extent, understand the Komi and play accordingly. You want it to understand that it's okay for black to be a little more defensive and so on and so forth, right? So um, we didn't just want kind of a trivial bot support. We wanted actually good bot support. Now, around this time, Tiltech bot becomes the best bot available on Playtech and indeed the best bot in the world. But support for Komi would be rolled out kind of slowly. In February of 2022, there was a Slate bot variant, which is the version of Tiltech bot that does not use a value function. It only uses a policy function. So this means for this weird version of Tiltech bot that actually it's much easier to support Komi. So in February 2022, so about 1 year after the Playtech support, Tiltech kind of gets its first bit of Komi into its DNA. And indeed, not long after, Tiltech bot gets TEI support for Komi. which means that the bot can play. The TI is the protocol used when bots play one another in like big engine matches. So it could kind of play with that, even though it hadn't been majorly trained to support it. And then between that kind of early 2022 and late 2023, 2024 is when finally Tiltac goes from kind of in the beginning, it's kind of supporting Komi as kind of a second class option, and then finally it gets kind of first class support for Komi uh, about a year or two later. So other than that, since then, all major seriously competitive bots have included Komi, TopazBot, Willem, Tech Zero, and Allianz Cataclysm have all kind of supported Komi natively, and in fact, they generally go a bit farther and truly assume Komi. Although I think Cataclysm bot is actually has a very simple evaluation function, so maybe it doesn't really need a special case assumption of Komi. But in any case, the bulk of engine development now kind of assumes Komi, and maybe in the future engines will look at some other variant of the game that we discussed earlier. But for now, 6x6 2 Komi tech remains complex and rich enough that even the engines of today, which are vastly better than humans, are able to have very interesting competitive matches. So that's kind of how Komi won out. It was simple enough to implement and got the support of the right people at the right time. And it turned out that that simple rule change was enough to improve the balance of the game to a significant enough degree that we still use it to this day. And now there is entire generations of players that have never played without Komi, except maybe the odd game with a bot or at the beginning of one's career. But by and large, Komi has developed into the only way to play serious competitive tech, at least for right now. But of course, um, the community is still innovating, and although it's unlikely that Komi will be superseded as the major way of balancing the game, perhaps we will have some other interesting variants. Indeed, it would be a mistake for me to not mention Ghost Tack, which is a variant of Tack where basically you start with it's the equivalent of chess 960 for Tack. You start with the places placed semi-randomly in a way that kind of some engine or some other entity has verified as kind of balanced. So there's still some interest in these other variants, but for the foreseeable future, we expect that they remain just that, variants. So I hope this has been interesting. For me, it was an interesting walk down memory lane. And until next time, this has been Abyss.